The engine hummed beneath my hands, steady but unwilling, like even the car wanted to turn back. I sat in the driver's seat with the letter folded on the passenger side, its envelope already worn soft from how many times I had unfolded and refolded it. No matter how I tried to crumple it, the words would not disappear. We would like you for dinner. Family only. Friday. No signature, no name, just that. The gates of the Pope estate rose before me, black iron twisted into elegant shapes that looked, in the right kind of light, like the jaws of a predator. As I waited, the headlights painted shadows across the bars, reminding me of nights spent outside locked doors when I was 16. Nights when I was told I no longer belonged, when I was forced into silence, carrying nothing but fear and a duffel bag too heavy for my arms. 12 years. That was how long it had been since I last stood on this ground. 12 years since I heard Claudia's voice sharpen into a blade. 12 years since Everett turned away rather than raise a hand in defense. Yet here I was, back again, because I could not ignore a letter written in my father's calligraphy. The gates groaned and hissed as they slid open, mechanical, indifferent. My car rolled forward over gravel that sparkled faintly in the glow of the headlights. The driveway was lined with hedges clipped so neatly they might have been measured by a ruler. The fountain in the center circle still spat water in arcs too precise to be natural. The mansion appeared at the end of the drive like a mausoleum dressed in marble. White pillars gleamed against the fading dusk, tall and cold, as if they wanted to swallow me whole. Every window glowed with yellow light, but none of it felt warm. I stopped the engine. For a long moment, I simply sat there, both hands gripping the steering wheel, chest rising and falling too fast. I whispered my own name just to anchor myself, Juliana Pope. Then I opened the door and stepped out. The gravel shifted beneath my boots with a sound like teeth grinding. The front door opened before I reached it. Martha, the old housekeeper, stood there, smaller than I remembered, lines carved deep into her face. Her eyes locked on mine, wide, uncertain. "Miss Pope," she said, but it came out fragile, almost a question. "They still call me that," I asked quietly. She did not answer. She only stepped aside and let me pass. The air inside smelled of lemon polish and candle wax. It hit me immediately, too clean, too sharp, a smell that belonged to staged perfection rather than home. My eyes lifted to the chandelier that blazed above, its crystals scattering light across marble floors that reflected me like a stranger. I did not feel welcome. I felt examined, weighed. From the staircase, heels clicked in delicate rhythm. Claudia descended first, her cream-colored dress flowing, her smile stretched like porcelain across her face. She looked at me as though I were a curiosity placed on display, something both fragile and dangerous. "Juliana," she said softly, "you have grown into such discipline." My mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if one looked quickly. "I work in administration," I told her. "Very boring. A lot of staplers." Behind her came Everett, older now, his once black hair streaked with silver. His eyes, however, had not changed. They remained the same pale steel that could freeze a room into obedience. He opened his arms halfway, then hesitated, dropping them as if embracing me would be too much. "Thank you for coming," he said. I almost laughed. The sound caught in my throat and turned bitter. They led me down the hallway, portraits of ancestors glaring down from gilded frames, until we reached the dining room. The table gleamed, long enough to seat a dozen, yet only 3 places were set. Silver cutlery aligned with surgical precision. Crystal glasses weighted in perfect symmetry. One seat was empty, third from the left. Nathan's seat, my younger brother. "Is he joining us?" I asked. Claudia's hand paused mid-motion as she lifted a wine bottle. "Busy," she said, pouring slowly. "A business trip, you know how he is." I did not anymore. The wine filled my glass, dark red that caught the chandelier's light like blood glinting on a blade. Claudia's hands were steady, elegant, but I noticed something small and sharp, white satin gloves covering her fingers. She had not worn those when she greeted me. The food was placed before us. Roast duck glazed to perfection, asparagus tips arranged like a painter's strokes, sauce drizzled with deliberate artistry. Everything gleamed. Everything was curated. I picked up my fork and ate because refusing would only make me weaker in this room. Everett asked about my work, as if the last 12 years could be covered by polite questions. Claudia complimented my haircut, her smile never faltering. I gave them nothing in return, only short answers, only enough to keep the illusion breathing. The wine tempted me. I lifted the glass and took a sip. Just one. Heat unfurled across the back of my throat. Smooth at first, but then something wrong, something heavy. I smiled through it, not letting the tremor show. My vision blurred slightly. The chandelier fractured into three. I blinked hard. Claudia was watching me. Her eyes sparkled in a way that made my stomach tight. And those gloves, white satin, spotless, gleamed under the light. The edges of the room softened. The voices blurred. "Excuse me," I murmured, pushing my chair back. My legs felt strange, as if gravity had doubled. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Claudia's serene expression, too calm, too poised, too polished for a family reunion. She looked like a queen who had already buried her pawn. When consciousness returned, it was slow and unwelcome. A single bulb flickered above me, casting shadows that crawled across cracked plaster walls. My body lay heavy on a sagging mattress. My wrists ached though no rope bound them. I was not tied. I was placed. The air smelled of damp wood and dust. My purse was gone. My phone too, my pockets empty. On a small wooden table beside the mattress lay one item. A golden hairpin shaped like a butterfly, one wing slightly bent. My breath caught in my throat. That hairpin had been mine years ago. I had left it behind in Washington, tucked inside a box with old envelopes. I had not touched it in years. It was not dusty. They had planted it here. My fingers shook as I reached for it. They had not invited me back. They had summoned me. Not as a daughter, as a scapegoat. I sat up slowly, every muscle trembling. My name repeated in my mind, like a shield against the void that threatened to swallow me. Juliana Pope. I still existed, and they were going to remember that too. The bulb above me buzzed, a tired insect trapped in glass. I pushed myself upright, pressing both palms against the mattress until the tremor in my arms steadied. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light, tracing the stains on the walls, the uneven lines where plaster had fallen away. The room smelled faintly of mildew and something sharper, almost metallic. I rose to my feet, legs heavy, knees unsteady. For a moment I thought I might collapse again, but stubbornness kept me upright. The hairpin glimmered faintly on the wooden table. I picked it up, holding it between two fingers. It felt cold, far too cold for something that had supposedly sat there waiting for me. The wing bent in the same way it had bent years ago when I dropped it on a sidewalk. This was not coincidence. They wanted me to see it. They wanted me to understand that they could reach into my past, strip it bare, and use it against me. The door groaned when I touched it. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, peering into a narrow corridor lined with threadbare carpet. My bare footsteps made no sound, though the air itself seemed to echo with every breath. I counted each step like I was rehearsing survival. 1, 2, 3. The hallway ended in a stairwell. The steps creaked under my weight, but I climbed anyway. At the top I found a window slit carved into the wall. The night outside was wide and cold, stars scattered like broken glass across the sky. Beyond the fence I could see the faint outline of the Pope mansion, glowing in the distance as though nothing had happened. That house carried itself like a crown on stolen heads, gleaming, majestic, rotten beneath. I whispered my name again, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. Juliana Pope. Still here, still alive. A voice echoed faintly from below. I froze, pressing myself into the shadows. The words were too muffled to catch, but I recognized the tone, Claudia, measured and sharp, as if she were giving instructions to a servant. The sound of Everett followed, lower, gruffer, though I could not make out the words. My skin prickled. They were not whispering like people ashamed. They were speaking like architects finalizing a plan. I retreated into the shadows and forced my breathing to steady. I needed to move, to find a way out, to understand why they had gone to such lengths to summon me only to silence me again. The stairwell led me into another hallway, this one lined with closed doors. I tried the first. Locked. The second. Locked. At the third door my fingers twisted the knob and it gave way with a soft click. The room inside smelled of paper and dust. A desk stood against the wall, its drawers half open. On top of the desk lay a single sheet of paper folded into thirds. I unfolded it slowly. My throat tightened. It was a photocopy of a birth certificate. My name was printed across the top, but sections were blank, no hospital listed, no middle name. At the bottom corner, a heavy black mark read void. My hands trembled. They had not only removed me from the will, they had erased me from the record of being born. I slid the paper into my coat pocket, every nerve buzzing. I stepped back into the hall and closed the door behind me. The corridor stretched longer than it should have, as if the house itself was growing, walls shifting, time stretching. My pulse thundered in my ears. At the far end, a faint glow leaked beneath a door. I crept toward it, each step deliberate, each muscle tight. The door was ajar. Through the crack, I saw Claudia's silhouette. She sat at a table, a glass of wine in her hand, the white gloves still on her fingers. She spoke softly into a phone. "Yes," she said. "It is done. Tomorrow we will finalize the papers. She will be gone by then. The voice on the other end was muffled male, but my stomach twisted because I knew who it was. Nathan. I gripped the wall until my nails dug into plaster. My own brother's voice, calm, casual, as if conspiring to erase me was nothing more than a business deal. I forced myself back, step by step, until the sound faded and the corridor swallowed me again. I could not confront them now. Not without proof, not without leverage. I found another stairwell leading down. The air grew colder the deeper I descended. At the bottom, I found a side door, rusted hinges but unlocked. I pushed it open and slipped outside. The night air slapped me across the face. It smelled of wet grass and gasoline. My lungs filled with it, desperate, greedy. The estate loomed behind me, windows glowing, pillars gleaming. It looked beautiful from this angle, but I knew better. Inside that house sat a family that had signed me away, erased me, poisoned me, and called it dinner. I tightened my grip on the hairpin still in my hand. Its bent wing pressed into my palm like a reminder. They thought I would fade quietly. They thought I would accept their silence as a coffin. But I was not 16 anymore. I walked quickly across the field, boots sinking into damp soil. Each step away from that house felt like a step toward reclaiming air that had been stolen from me. My mind spun with fragments: Claudia's voice on the phone, Everett's silence, Nathan's betrayal, the voided birth certificate. Each piece was part of a puzzle, and I was no longer the pawn trapped in its center. The road stretched ahead, dark and endless. I had no car, no phone, no money, but I had a name. Mine, and I had survived once already. The night whispered around me, the wind carrying fragments of leaves across the pavement. My chest ached, but my stride grew steadier. I repeated my name under my breath until the rhythm became my heartbeat. Juliana Pope. They had erased me from their world. Now it was my turn to carve myself back into it. I walked until the mansion lights disappeared behind me, swallowed by distance and shadow. The story of my return had only just begun. Morning light leaked through the cheap curtains of the motel, turning the air into a pale wash of yellow that smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. I sat on the edge of the bed with my head bent low and my hand curled around the golden hairpin. Its weight was small, but the memories it carried were not. I rolled it between my fingers as if the cool metal might anchor me. Sleep had not been generous. I had spent the night flinching at every slam of a car door in the parking lot, every argument muffled through the thin walls, every sigh of the radiator as if the building itself was warning me. When the sun finally rose fully, I forced myself into the bathroom, splashed cold water over my face until I could breathe evenly, and looked at my reflection. My eyes were ringed with shadows, my hair unkempt, but beneath the exhaustion was a determination I had not felt in years. The night had not swallowed me, the family had not succeeded. The documents and lies I glimpsed in that house were only the surface of something deeper. Today I would begin to dig. The attorney I chose was not from a glittering downtown tower. Jennifer Coe's office was tucked on the second floor of a brick building with paint peeling near the windows. Her name on the door was simple, almost too modest, as if she wanted to warn visitors that what mattered here was not appearances but precision. The receptionist looked up when I entered, her eyes flicking over my worn coat, the tired set of my shoulders, the folder I clutched tight against my ribs. She did not ask questions, just pressed the intercom. A moment later, a voice instructed her to let me in. Jennifer met me herself, standing in the doorway of her office. She was tall, her posture carrying an ease that spoke of discipline more than vanity. Her hair was tied back without ceremony, her glasses sliding down her nose. She did not offer a handshake. Instead, she studied my scar, the lines of my face, the tension in my stance, and then motioned me inside. "Sit where you can see the door," she said. Her office was clean, controlled. One wall lined with shelves of casebooks, another dotted with framed citations. No photographs of family, no distractions. A desk covered with neatly stacked files and a small pot of orchids that bloomed white against the order. I placed the hairpin on her desk and sat. "Tell me everything," she said, so I did. I told her about the letter with its cold demand. About the dinner and the way Claudia's smile felt like a blade. About the wine, the gloves, the fall into darkness. About waking in a room stripped of identity, the birth certificate stamped void, the sound of voices through a crack in a door. I told her about Everett's silence, Claudia's command, Nathan's betrayal. She never interrupted. Her pen scratched across a pad without pause, her eyes flicking up at intervals, sharp and clear. When I finished, the silence sat heavy between us. "Names," she said. "Dates, the law firm that drafted the trust, the schools you attended, the middle initial you used on early applications, everything." I gave her all I remembered. Every scrap of detail, even the small things I once thought irrelevant. She turned to her computer and began pulling records, her fingers moving quick, cert. The glow of the monitor painted her face pale, but her eyes did not waver. She checked registries, probate indexes, birth records. The silence filled with the hum of the machine. At last she leaned back, pushed her glasses higher, and let out a quiet breath. "You are not listed in the current trust," she said. "Not now, and according to this database, not ever." The words slid into me like a blade. "That is not possible," I said. She tapped the screen and turned it toward me. There was the scan of the original trust from 17 years ago, my name clearly printed with an allocated share. And then the next scan, only 6 months later, my name cleanly erased as if it had never been. At the bottom, a scrawl that was supposed to be my signature. My breath caught. It looked familiar but wrong, like an echo that did not belong to my throat. "I was a minor then," I whispered. Jennifer nodded. "Exactly." Removal of a minor beneficiary requires court review, representation, verification. This amendment has no court stamp, no docket number. It was never certified. It is fraudulent. Her voice was calm, factual, but my pulse thundered in my ears. She opened another window. 3 weeks after this fraudulent amendment, the Pope Dynasty ledger shows an investment of $15 million from an overseas fund, contingent upon new shareholder agreements. Someone erased you and traded your existence for capital. Her words carved the room into a sharper shape. My stomach twisted, but my mind clung to the rhythm of logic. The voided certificate, the forged amendment, the money, each piece belonged to the same puzzle. "What do I have?" I asked. "What can stand in court?" "Not enough yet. We need original documents. Witnesses. Anyone who touched those files. Anyone who remembers you being there and being removed. And we need to move quickly." People who erase children do not hesitate to erase witnesses. I thought of Martha, her eyes when she saw me, fearful but not surprised. "Martha," I said. "The housekeeper. She has been with them for decades." Jennifer wrote the name down. "Long service means long memories. She could be useful if she is willing to speak." Her gaze shifted to the hairpin. "Objects can be testimony too. This is proof of intent. Someone planted it in that room for you to find. They wanted you to know they still hold the threads of your past." I closed my hand over the hairpin. It pressed into my skin, sharp against my palm. She printed copies of the trust documents, the ledger entry, the voided certificate. She handed me a list of tasks, names to find, addresses to check, archives to search. Her eyes softened slightly as she said, "They will fight this. They will smear you, intimidate you, try to bury you again. You must be relentless." I left her office with the folder heavy in my hands, the air outside bright with sunshine that felt almost cruel. People bustled down the street carrying groceries, laughing at jokes, living lives untouched by erasure. I walked 3 blocks before I stopped to breathe. The documents were my armor now. Fragile but real. I needed more. The truth was buried deep, and I was going to dig until my fingers bled if I had to. The bus ride back from the crash site felt longer than it should have. I sat in the last row, folder pressed tight to my chest, eyes fixed on the dirty glass window. Trees blurred past, houses blurred past, lives I would never touch blurred past. I could still feel the chill of the guardrail under my hand, the weight of Chase's words echoing in my ears. There had been another passenger in that car. Someone else had bled while I was written into a report I never belonged to. Nathan had walked away, calm, into a waiting SUV. It was not grief that tightened my chest. It was fury. Fury carried quieter than grief, but sharper. When I stepped off the bus, the city pressed back around me, noisy and bright. I found a corner diner that smelled of frying oil and coffee burned half an hour too long. I slid into a booth, pulled the papers from my folder, and spread them across the table. The trust amendment, the ledger entry, the voided certificate, the preliminary crash report. Each one was a piece of a design so deliberate it left no space for doubt. The waitress brought me coffee and looked at the mess of paper with eyes that understood trouble when she saw it. She did not ask questions, just refilled the cup twice without speaking. I thanked her quietly. As I traced my finger across the fake signature again, the bell over the door rang. I glanced up instinctively. For a moment, my breath froze. Martha stood just inside the doorway, clutching a paper bag of groceries. She looked older, smaller than I remembered, her hands trembling as she adjusted the bag against her hip. I stood quickly, gathering the papers. She saw me and her eyes widened. She did not move closer, but she did not turn away either. She crossed the diner slowly, her face pale. "Miss Pope," she whispered again, the same way she had at the mansion door. "Juliana," I corrected softly. Please, just Juliana. She glanced around nervously and slid into the booth across from me. Her fingers picked at the paper bag until the seam began to tear. I knew you were not gone, she said, her voice barely above the hum of the diner. I told myself someone like you could not just vanish, but they made it look so real. They said there was nothing left of you. They told me to never speak your name again. Her words cracked like dry twigs. I placed the hairpin on the table between us. Her eyes filled instantly with tears. I found it in the room where they put me, I said. Someone wanted me to see it. Was it you? She shook her head quickly. No, I would not dare. That was Claudia. She wanted you to understand what she still controlled. She has always kept every scrap, every item you left behind. She keeps them locked in a drawer as if they are trophies. The coffee turned bitter on my tongue. Claudia had staged even the memory of me. Martha, I asked gently, do you remember the night I was forced out? Her hands tightened around the bag. I remember everything. I remember the shouting. I remember Everett standing at the top of the stairs and saying nothing. I remember Claudia's voice when she told me to close the doors and never open them for you again. And I remember Nathan, he laughed. He said it would be better this way. I should have run after you. I should have given you money, a coat, something. I am sorry. The tears on her cheeks were real, but apologies could not erase a decade. Still, she was a witness. Will you testify? I asked, her eyes widened with fear. They will destroy me if I speak. They already destroyed me, I said, and they are not finished. She bowed her head. Silence stretched long, filled only by the clatter of plates from the kitchen. Finally, she nodded once, a small, trembling motion. I will testify, she whispered. But not here, not yet. You must gather more. They will crush me if I stand alone. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was frail, shaking, but still strong enough to squeeze mine once before she pulled away. She rose quickly and left the diner, the bell above the door ringing softly after her. I sat back, the hairpin gleaming on the table. For the first time since I returned, I felt the faint stir of allies. Fragile, terrified allies, but allies nonetheless. When I stepped back into the street, the sun was lower, the city painted in shades of copper and smoke. I called Jennifer from the burner phone. Martha will testify, I said. There was a pause. Then, that is good, but she is vulnerable. We must move faster. I also have the crash report. Chase pulled records. There was another passenger. Another passenger? Yes, DNA that does not match me, blood on the passenger side. Nathan was there after the crash. There is footage. Her breath hissed through the receiver. That changes everything. They staged your death with another body. Whose body? I asked quietly. We will find out, she said. Bring everything to me tomorrow. Tonight, stay invisible. I hung up and slipped the phone into my pocket. The streets felt heavier, as if eyes followed me through every reflection. I walked quickly toward the motel, the folder under my arm, my other hand clenched around the hairpin. Inside my room, I locked the door, set the chair under the handle, and spread the documents again. The evidence was growing, but so were the shadows. Claudia and Everett had traded my existence for power. Nathan had played his role without hesitation. And someone, some unnamed passenger, had bled in my place. The truth was buried, but the ground was beginning to crack. I lay back on the bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, and whispered my name again, steady and certain. Juliana Pope. Not gone, not erased, not finished. The motel room smelled of damp plaster and regret, but I stayed awake until dawn with my folder spread across the bed like a makeshift battlefield. The trust amendment. The voided certificate, the preliminary crash report, and the scrap of fabric Chase had sealed in a bag, its edge stained with dried rust that had once been blood. Every piece was proof, and every piece was incomplete. I could not stop staring at the crash report. The words blurred in and out, but one fact remained sharp. The passenger side blood did not belong to me, which meant someone else had sat in that car, someone who had been injured or killed, and I had been written in their place. My absence had been filled with another person's absence. My erasure had been completed with theirs. The question was who. I called Chase just after sunrise. His voice answered, rough from lack of sleep, but steady as always. I need you to run the DNA from the fabric, I said. I told you I would, he replied. Quiet lab, no questions asked, but results take time. How long? 48 hours if no one interrupts me, less if I bend some rules. Bend them, I said. There was a pause. Juliana, this will not just be about you. Whoever that blood belongs to, someone wanted them gone as badly as they wanted you gone. I know, I said. That is why we need to find out. I hung up and stared at the ceiling until the motel clock clicked another minute forward. My chest felt tight, but not from fear, from clarity. They had staged the accident not only to erase me, but to erase someone else. And Nathan had been there to make sure the story stuck. I packed the folder into a backpack, slipped the burner phone into my pocket, and left the motel before the desk clerk could ask questions. The morning air was sharp, cutting through my exhaustion. Jennifer's office was quiet when I arrived. She was already at her desk, hair pulled back, eyes sharper than the coffee steaming beside her. "You look like someone who has not slept in days," she said. "I have not," I replied. "Tell me something useful." She pushed a file across the desk. "I froze the trust distributions, at least temporarily. They will challenge it, but for now, money cannot move without court review. That will get their attention." I opened the file. The judge's order was stamped in heavy black ink. For the first time, something official had shifted in my favor. "What about Martha?" I asked. "She is frightened, but I spoke with her by phone. She will not testify yet, but she will sign an affidavit if you can provide corroborating evidence. A housekeeper's memory alone will not hold against a dynasty's lawyers." I nodded, though the weight in my chest did not lift. "We need more than memory. We need to prove the staged accident." Jennifer leaned back, folding her hands. "Then you go back to the scene, not to find scraps this time, to find records. Who filed the crash report? Who handled the towing? Who signed the medical examiner's notes? Paper leaves trails even when people try to bury them." The word set my path. By noon, I was at the county record's office. The building was old, its lobby filled with the smell of dust and ink. Clerks shuffled papers behind glass windows. I asked for the crash file by date and location. The clerk looked at me like I was one of dozens who asked for nonsense each week, but she typed anyway. When she handed me the file, my stomach tightened. The report was stamped with the name of an officer I did not recognize. The notes were brief, too brief, as if someone had rushed through them. The victim's identity was listed as female, presumed Juliana Pope. No dental match, no DNA confirmation, just a name slotted in like an afterthought. Presumed. That word crawled under my skin. I photographed every page, then slipped the file back across the counter. Outside on the steps, I called Jennifer. "They wrote me in," I said. "No confirmation, just presumption. And the officer who filed it was not the one assigned to that patrol route." Her voice was low and tight. "That means substitution. Someone else filed the report in his place, someone with instructions." The air felt heavier. I caught a bus toward the towing yard listed in the report. It sat on the edge of town, chain-link fence sagging under years of weather. Rows of cars sat rusting in silence. The attendant, a man with grease on his shirt and suspicion in his eyes, leaned on the counter when I asked about the wreck. "That one was gone fast," he said. "Picked up by corporate order. Not usual. Usually we keep them weeks. That one was gone in days." "Corporate order?" I asked. "Signed by a lawyer, fancy paper. They said the vehicle was contaminated evidence and needed disposal. I never saw it again." My jaw tightened. "Do you remember who signed it?" He shrugged. "Tall man, expensive suit. I do not remember the name, but the paper had the Pope crest." The word crest felt like acid. They had not even tried to hide it. I thanked him and walked back to the road. The afternoon sun burned hot, but my skin felt cold. The car had been destroyed, the report falsified, the body substituted, the evidence wiped clean, but traces still existed in memories, in signatures, in the gaps where truth should have been. When I returned to the motel, the voicemail light on my burner phone was blinking. I pressed it with shaking fingers. "Juliana," Chase's voice said, "the lab is fast-tracking your fabric sample. But listen, someone else is looking for it too. Be careful. They know you are digging." The line went dead. I sat on the edge of the bed, the folder heavy in my lap, and felt the weight of silence press in. They knew, they had always known. But this time, I was not just running. I was not 16. They wanted me erased. They wanted me silent. But I had found their accident, and now I was going to tear it apart piece by piece until they had nothing left to hide behind. I whispered my name again, not as a reminder but as a vow. Juliana Pope. Not presumed. Not erased, alive, and about to dig deeper than they ever expected. I woke before dawn with the kind of clarity that comes only after too many sleepless nights. The folder of documents lay open on the chair where I had left it, pages fanned like a deck of cards waiting for me to draw. I stared at the copy of the crash report again, the word presumed glaring up at me like an accusation. Presumed dead, presumed gone, presumed erased. The arrogance of it was heavier than any chain. I brewed motel coffee that tasted of rust and grit, drank it anyway, and told myself that today I would not simply chase shadows. Today I would name them. The first step was the precinct. The officer listed on the crash report, the one whose name felt unfamiliar, was supposedly still active. The desk sergeant eyed me with suspicion when I asked, his hand pausing over the logbook. He disappeared into the back for a long time before returning. "That officer retired 2 years ago," he said flatly. "He signed the report 12 years ago," I pressed. He shrugged. "Then you should take it up with records." Something in his eyes told me more than his words. Not ignorance. Fear. I left before questions became obstacles, but the chill clung to me like frost. At the municipal archive, the clerk guided me to a gray room with cabinets that smelled of dust and ink. I traced my finger along folders until I found the crash year. Most reports were thick, with photos, statements, technical data. Mine was thin, brittle. I opened it and froze. Half the pages were missing. The accident diagram was gone. The photographs were gone. The blood analysis was gone. All that remained were skeletal notes and the presumption of my name. Someone had gutted the file and done it officially. I sat there for a long time, the fluorescent light buzzing above me, the empty folder heavy in my hands. My pulse thudded in my throat. When I finally forced myself to stand, the clerk looked at me curiously, but said nothing. Perhaps she had seen this before. Perhaps she knew better than to speak. Back outside, the sky was gray with low clouds. I pulled my coat tighter and walked until my legs steadied. If the official files were hollow, then the truth lay in the unofficial ones. I called Chase. His voice came through static. "I need the lab results," I said. There was a pause. "You need to hear this in person. Meet me at the underpass on 17th. Noon." The line clicked dead. I arrived early, the wind tugging at my coat. Trucks rumbled overhead, shaking grit from the concrete. When Chase finally appeared, he carried his case close to his chest. His eyes scanned the shadows before he stepped into the light. He opened the case and handed me a sealed envelope. My fingers shook as I tore it open. The DNA results were printed in black and white. Female. Age approximate, late 20s. Blood type O negative, not Juliana Pope. "Who was she?" I whispered. Chase shook his head. "The lab matched nothing in public databases." No missing persons flagged. Whoever she was, her records are buried deeper than the public can reach. The words sank into me like stones in water. Another woman had died in that car. A stranger, erased twice, once by her death and again by being written over with my name. "Why her?" I asked. "Because her body was available," Chase said grimly. "Because someone needed a stand-in. Because you were worth more to them dead than alive." I folded the report and slid it into my folder. My chest ached with something darker than anger. This was not only my story. Someone else's life had been stolen to finish the illusion of my death. Chase studied me. "You know what this means, Jules. If we keep pulling, we will find a grave with no marker, and it will point straight back to your family." "Good," I said. My voice was steady, colder than I expected. "That is exactly what I want." That night, I returned to Jennifer's office. The lights were dim, the blinds drawn. She listened in silence as I laid out the DNA results, the missing files, the retired officer. Her face did not change, but her fingers tapped slowly on the desk. "They built a coffin out of paperwork," she said. "They filled it with someone else and sealed it with your name. This is more than fraud. This is conspiracy." Her eyes locked on mine. "Do you understand what you are holding? This is not just inheritance law anymore. This is criminal." "I understand," I said. "And I am not going to stop." She nodded once. "Then we prepare, we gather the rest. We build the case so strong no judge can look away. But Juliana," her voice softened slightly, "they will not let this surface without a fight. You must be ready for the cost." I thought of Martha's trembling hands. I thought of the blood on the passenger seat. I thought of Claudia's gloved fingers pouring wine. "I am ready," I said. Jennifer exhaled slowly, as if she had been waiting for that answer. When I left her office, the city felt sharper, every sound too close, every shadow too deep. But my steps were steady. For the first time, I was not walking away from my past. I was walking directly into it. The accident had been staged, the evidence buried, but the cracks were widening and I would push until the whole structure collapsed. As I crossed the street, the folder pressed tight under my arm, I whispered my name into the night. Juliana Pope, alive, unfinished. And hunting the truth that had once hunted me. The night after I left Jennifer's office, I did not return to the motel. The motel felt too thin, too vulnerable, too easy to find. Instead, I walked the city until the streets blurred into silence and the neon signs burned tired against the fog. By dawn, I ended up at an internet cafe tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. It smelled of instant noodles and overheated machines. The kind of place where people vanished into glowing screens without names. I rented a terminal and slipped on headphones. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The crash, the erased trust, the false birth certificate, all of it had threads in digital corridors. If the family had built paper coffins, they had also built digital shadows. And I had once learned to follow shadows. I logged into a network I had not touched in years, one that whispered with the remnants of people who traded secrets like currency. Old codes, old passwords, old handles. Some of them still worked. The glow of the screen painted my face as I searched archives, dead links, cached files. Hours passed. Coffee cooled beside me. And then I found it, buried in a backup directory no one was supposed to see. A log of internal transfers from Pope Dynasty, encrypted but not perfectly. I ran it through an algorithm I had written years ago. Numbers and dates spilled across the screen. Among them was one that froze me. A transfer dated the night after the staged crash. 7 million wired to a shell company with no address, no staff, no purpose. The reference line was a single word: silence. The cafe hummed with the sound of strangers typing, but suddenly the air felt thin. They had paid for my disappearance. They had paid for the silence of whoever had died in my place. I copied the data to a flash drive and logged out. Outside, the morning was gray and wet. I walked quickly, my coat clinging damp to my shoulders. Every pedestrian felt like a threat, every car like a watcher. By the time I reached Jennifer's office, I was trembling from more than the rain. She studied the data in silence, her brow furrowing deeper with each line. "This is internal," she said at last. "You should not have been able to access it." "They should not have been able to kill someone in my name," I replied. She pressed her fingers together. "This is evidence of financial conspiracy, bribery, hush money, but it is not enough. We need original files, not copies. Courts will not take data ripped from hidden servers unless we can authenticate the source." "How?" I asked. She leaned back. "There is only one way. The core server inside the Dynasty headquarters, that is where the originals are kept. If we can retrieve the unedited logs, the paper trail will be undeniable." Her words sent a cold pulse down my spine. I remembered those halls, the glass walls, the hum of air conditioning, the way every door clicked shut like a jaw. "You want me to go back inside," I said. Her eyes did not waver. "You are the only one who can." I left her office with the flash drive in my pocket, my heart pounding. The idea of stepping into that building again twisted my stomach, but there was no other path. They had erased me once inside those walls. I would return now to carve myself back into existence. Chase met me that evening under the cover of a broken streetlight. His jacket smelled of rain, his expression grim. "You are serious about this," he said. "I have to be," I replied. He handed me a small device. "Key logger. Plug it into any terminal, it will capture credentials. Do not get caught." "I will not," I said, though my voice was less steady than I wanted. The next night I stood outside Pope Dynasty headquarters. The building loomed over the city, glass and steel shimmering like a blade. I wore a dark coat, hair tied back, head lowered. The lobby was bright, filled with the sound of polished shoes and clipped voices. I slipped inside with a stream of employees, swiped a borrowed access card, and walked as if I belonged. Every step echoed with memories. The corridors smelled the same: cold air, expensive polish, the faint metallic tang of power. I found a side room, slipped the device into a workstation, and waited. Minutes crawled, my pulse hammered. Finally, the screen flickered. Passwords captured. Access granted. I moved deeper, down into the basement levels where servers hummed in cages of light. The glow painted the floor in patterns that looked like prison bars. I inserted the captured credentials and the gate clicked open. The air was colder inside. Machines hummed like voices speaking in a language only wires understood. I found the core directory, my hands trembling as I searched, and there it was: original logs, transfers, emails, notes, not altered, not forged, clear, brutal truth. I copied everything to the flash drive. My reflection glared back at me in the glass panel of the server door. For a moment I felt both invisible and terrifyingly visible. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. I froze. Shadows moved against the light. I yanked the drive free, shut down the terminal, and pressed myself against the wall. 2 men in suits walked past, their voices low. They did not see me. The hum of machines swallowed me whole. When they were gone, I slipped out, heart pounding so loud it drowned the silence. I walked fast, not running, through the corridors, through the lobby, out into the night. Rain fell hard against my face. I did not care. In my pocket, the flash drive burned hot like a secret too dangerous to hold. I whispered my name into the storm. Juliana Pope. Alive, unbroken, carrying the truth in my hands. I did not go back to the motel. I ducked into the first cab that stopped and asked for 3 different intersections before finally getting out on a block where the streetlights flickered and the rain washed the pavement clean. I walked the last few minutes to Jennifer's office with the flash drive pressed into my palm so hard it left a mark. She opened the door before I could knock twice. Her eyes went straight to my hand, then to my face, reading the tremor beneath my calm. "Tell me you have more than a rumor," she said. I placed the drive on her desk and waited while she booted a machine that was never connected to the outside world. The screen lit the room in a cold glow. Folders opened. Timestamps appeared. Names, internal memos, transaction ledgers. It was like watching a vault surrender. Jennifer did not speak for a long time. She scrolled with the patience of a surgeon and the focus of someone who knows the next line might be the one that changes everything. "There," I said, leaning in. "Look at the sequence the night after the crash. 7 million wired to a shell company with a single word in the reference line. Silence. Then 3 separate internal authorizations routed through a director-level terminal. The terminal identifier matched a device inside the executive suite. Another log showed a purge request against a set of access files linked to my name. They paid to bury me," Jennifer said softly, "and they deleted your presence from their systems the same night." She clicked into another folder. Internal emails. 2 were routine, then came one that was not. It contained a short instruction from a board address to legal counsel to expedite vehicle disposal due to contamination risk. There was a scanned signature block. Everett's name sat beneath it like an accusation that had learned to spell. Jennifer exhaled slowly. "Originals with audit trails. If we authenticate the server source, this is admissible." "How do we authenticate?" I asked. "We need a witness inside to attest to the location and custody of these files," she said. "Someone who can say these logs are what they claim to be and that they were kept in the ordinary course of business." "Jane," I said. "Yes," Jennifer answered, "if she will risk it." We arranged the meeting in a public place that protected anonymity more than it invited conversation. A library room with tall windows and a constant shuffle of pages made by people who believed paper would outlive them. Jane arrived in a dark coat, hair tucked into a cap, glasses replacing the contacts I had seen before. She sat without greeting and placed a worn employee badge on the table like a card in a game no one wanted to play. "You kept copies," I said. "I kept timestamps," she replied. "And I kept a note of every time they told me to delete something that should not have been deleted." We showed her the logs from the flash drive. She stared at them for several seconds as if choosing whether to remember or deny. Then she nodded once. "These live in the basement core under the legal archive hierarchy," she said. "Only a few people can write there. The audit service records every change. If you pulled these last night, the internal checksum will show an external read at that hour." "I can swear to that if you need me to." "We do," Jennifer said. Jane's hands were steady, but her voice was not. "They will come for me if I testify." "They will come for you if you do not," I said before I could soften it. "They already came for me." Jane looked up, and for a moment I saw the anger beneath the caution. "My mother cleaned their floors for 20 years, she said. "They fired her without severance 3 months before she got sick. She died without enough to pay her last rent. They sent flowers that wilted in a day. I have been waiting for a reason to hate them properly." She slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a printout of a system notice showing the purge request against my internal profile and the confirmation recorded from a device in the executive suite. The confirmation time was 2:13 in the morning, hours after the staged crash. "Put that with your transfer labeled silence," she said. "A judge cannot miss the pattern." We left separately. I walked until the cold steadied me. When I lifted my head, I realized where my feet had taken me. The cathedral steps rose in front of me like something out of memory, stone-worn by knees and weather. I went inside only far enough to sit in the last row and listen to the building breathe. I did not pray. I let the quiet wrap around the noise in my head until it could be folded. That night, Jennifer and I worked in her conference room with the lights low and the door locked. We built a timeline. The forged amendment that removed me as a minor without court approval. The investment that followed, contingent on new agreements. The staged crash. The immediate transfer to the shell company, the purge of my internal records in the early hours, the order to destroy the vehicle, the retired officer, the gutted crash file, the DNA that was not mine. We mapped names to actions and actions to statutes. We assembled exhibits and drafted declarations. We wrote the motion to preserve corporate data and to compel production of the original server logs with checksums. We drafted the request for a temporary restraining order to prevent further tampering. Jennifer's pen became a metronome. My voice found the words that made a map where a maze had been. At dawn, the room smelled like coffee and ink and the kind of determination that does not come from anger alone. Jennifer pushed the final packet across the table. "We file this now," she said. The clock starts the moment the clerk stamps it. They will have 48 hours to appear and argue why truth should not be allowed inside a courtroom. I looked at the stack. For the first time since the letter had arrived, the future did not look like a wall. It looked like a door waiting for a handle. When I stepped outside, the city had shifted into mourning. People hurried with cups in their hands and headphones over their ears. A boy dragged a cello case up a bus step as if he was hauling a secret. The world did not know that a dynasty was about to be asked questions it had never had to answer. The world did not care. That felt like freedom. I turned a corner and stopped. A black SUV idled at the curb with its lights off. For a heartbeat, the street tilted the way it had tilted at the crash site. Then the passenger window lowered. The driver stared at me through sunglasses, even though the sun had not risen high enough to require them. There was a pause, a sort of held breath. Then the window slid up and the SUV pulled away, merging into traffic like a thought swallowed before it becomes a sentence. I stood still until the noise of the street reclaimed its rhythm. I sent a single text to Chase with a description and the plate. He replied with one word: logged. At noon, we filed the motions. The clerk stamped them with a sound that felt louder than any gavel. By afternoon, service had been made on the dynasty's council. By evening, my phone began to ring with numbers I did not recognize. I let them ring. I did not owe answers to anyone who had not bled to earn them. When night fell, I walked back to the river. The water slipped past in a steady, indifferent current. I leaned on the railing and let the cold work its way through my coat. The temptation to imagine the plot twist that would blow open the sky pressed against my ribs, but I held it back. That belongs to the courtroom, I told myself. That belongs to the moment when words are sworn and lies are pinned to dates and signatures. A hand touched the rail beside mine. I looked over. Jane stood there, eyes on the water. I sent the affidavit, she said quietly. I signed my name the way my mother taught me to, clear enough for a judge to read and for a coward to fear. Thank you, I said. She nodded but did not look at me. You know they will try to make you the villain, she said. They will say you want money. They will say you want revenge. They can say what they like, I answered. I want a record that does not lie when I am not there to speak. Jane smiled at the river. That is what records are, she said. The future's memory. She left before I could answer. I stayed until the wind knifed straight through and the first stars shook free of the clouds. Then I went back to the motel and locked the door and sat on the floor with my back to it. I placed the hairpin on the carpet and watched it catch the weak lamplight. I thought of the unknown woman in the car. I thought of Martha and her paper bag and the way her voice broke when she said my name. I thought of the transfer labeled silence and the purge at 2:13 and the signatures that thought they would never be read aloud. I said my name once quietly to the empty room. Juliana Pope. The underground war had moved into daylight. The data was no longer just numbers. It had a heartbeat now, and it matched mine. The morning after we filed the motions, the city felt different. Every corner seemed sharper, every stranger's glance longer, every sound like it had an echo I could not trace. I carried the weight of the documents in my bag, but the heavier weight was invisible, the knowledge that somewhere behind polished doors, my family was reading the same motions and preparing to strike back. I had been erased once. They would not forgive me for trying to undo it. Jennifer called just after dawn. The court has set an expedited hearing, 48 hours. My chest tightened. That soon? That soon, she said. They want to contain this before it spreads, which means we must move quickly. By noon, I was back in her office. The flash drive sat between us like a live wire. She scrolled through the internal logs again, her eyes scanning each line with surgical precision. They will challenge authenticity, she said. Even with Jane, even with the checksum, they will say you hacked it, forged it, twisted it. We need a second source. Where? I asked. She met my gaze. The archive vault in the old estate, the one Everett had built when digital records were new. He insisted on mirrored storage. If the mirror still exists, it will contain untouched logs. The estate, the place I had fled years ago with nothing but fear and the taste of rain. To go back there felt like walking into the past with my eyes wide open, but I nodded. Then I go. Jennifer's hand brushed the file. You cannot go alone. I left her office with Chase waiting by the corner. He had the look of someone who had already decided before I asked. You need backup, he said. I need silence, I answered. You get both, he said, and fell into step beside me. We drove out after dark, headlights carving through the trees that lined the long road. The estate loomed like a shadow of memory, stone walls rising against the sky. My hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. The gates were locked, but Chase found the cut in the fence I had once used as a child to sneak into the orchard. We slipped through. The grass was wet with dew, the night heavy with silence. Inside, the house smelled the same. Old wood, dust, polish, the faint metallic scent of silver left too long untouched. My footsteps echoed against marble floors that remembered me too well. We moved through corridors until we reached the lower levels. The vault door sat at the end of a narrow hall, steel set into stone. I remembered watching Everett turn the dial when I was small, the sound like a safe swallowing secrets. Chase knelt and studied the lock. Electronic overlay, newer than the rest of the house. They upgraded. "Can you break it?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "If I could not, I would not be here." Minutes ticked by, each one sharp. Finally, the lock clicked and the door swung inward. The vault smelled of cold air and metal. Rows of drives lined the walls, humming faintly. Dust coated the floor. Chase handed me gloves. I searched until I found the mirror directory Jennifer had mentioned. It was there, untouched, unaltered, waiting. My heart thudded as I pulled the data. Logs, emails, transfers, everything. And then I saw it. A folder labeled with my name. I hesitated before opening it. Chase's eyes met mine. "Do it," he said. The folder held scans of files I had never seen. School records, medical charts, letters written in Everett's hand. Beneath them, a report stamped confidential. I read the first line and felt the floor tilt. Subject, Juliana Pope. Status, contingency asset. I froze. Chase leaned closer. "What does that mean?" My hands trembled as I scrolled. The report described me not as a daughter, not as an heir, but as an asset to be leveraged, erased, or deployed as needed. My entire childhood cataloged like inventory. Every school chosen not for my education but for access. Every friendship monitored. Every move measured. "They did not just erase me," I whispered. "They built me, they designed me to be disposable." Chase swore softly under his breath. "This is bigger than inheritance. This is control." I copied everything, my chest burning with rage and disbelief. The hum of the drive seemed louder now, as if the walls themselves wanted me gone. When I turned back, Chase was staring at the corridor outside the vault. His hand moved to his jacket. "We are not alone," he said quietly. Footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, too heavy for coincidence. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket and closed the vault. The data was ours now. The truth was no longer theirs alone. But the veil of secrets had only just begun to lift. The lights in the corridor outside the vault pulsed with a slow, electric heartbeat, washing the stone in pale bands of white. Chase tilted his head, listening. 2 sets of footsteps. No conversation. The kind of silence that comes from people who already know what they are supposed to do. We moved without speaking. Chase eased the vault door until it was an inch from closed and positioned me in the narrow angle between the hinge and the wall. From there, I could see only the slice of hallway that mattered. A shadow entered the frame. Broad shoulders, dark suit. The shadow paused, as if scenting air, then stepped forward until a face drifted into view. I recognized him from board photographs taken at charity galas where the wine was older than patience. Security director, loyal to Everett, cold eyes that looked like they enjoyed calculating. He raised his hand and the second man stepped up. They tried the vault handle. Chase had left the dial exactly where it had been. The first man frowned. He pressed a palm to the metal and leaned close. Then he relaxed, confident again, and took a step back as if he had only come to confirm that gravity still existed. They turned away. Their footsteps faded up the corridor toward the main stairs. We waited through 30 slow heartbeats. Chase mouthed now and I slid into the hall. We did not run. Running echoes. We walked with quiet purpose down the service passage that led to a set of narrow stairs built for people meant to be invisible. On the second landing, I stopped. The air here was cooler, touched by the faint draft of an exterior door. A memory poured through me without warning. I was 12 and barefoot, pressing my back into the same patch of shadow while a storm beat the world outside into a curtain of sound. I remembered the way the house groaned under weather and how the groan had sounded like something alive and tired. I remembered thinking that the house had a stomach and that I was living in it. We reached the ground level and slipped into a laundry corridor. The smell of detergent hit hard and clean. Chase checked corners and motioned me forward with 2 fingers. The back door was a plain slab of metal with scuffs near the bottom from deliveries that had not bothered with care. Chase worked the lock with the ease of someone who has broken out of worse. When the door swung inward, the cold night rushed in, smelling of wet grass and old stone. We crossed the lawn low and fast and slid behind a hedgerow shaped with such discipline it felt like a warning. The gate and the perimeter fence was where I remembered. A single twist of wire and the path out opened. Only when the road lay between us and the house did we let ourselves breathe. Chase kept scanning the trees. I kept seeing the folder label in my head. Contingency asset. The words would not leave. They had the clinical chill of metal and the intimacy of a fingerprint. We drove in silence until the estate disappeared behind us and the highway lifted us onto the edge of the city. I took the flash drive from my pocket and held it where the dashboard light touched it, a small rectangle with the weight of a confession. Chase broke the quiet first. "Are you steady?" "I am steady," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. We parked 2 streets away from Jennifer's building and walked the last stretch under a sky that was trying to clear. She opened her office door without a word and ushered us into the conference room. The table where we had mapped our case last night was still scattered with notes and empty cups. I set the drive down like a heart just lifted from ice. "Show me," she said. We mounted the drive and mirrored the vault directory. The screen filled with folders and then with files. Clean time stamps, internal hash values, checksums that matched the server ledger. The mirror had done whatever it intended. It had preserved the past for the day when he might need to prove something. He had not planned on proving me. Jennifer opened the folder with my name. I watched the muscles in her jaw tighten as she read: education strategy, health metrics, travel controls. Language that treated a daughter like a piece of equipment. There were memos from consultants that recommended restricting social ties during critical development windows. There were notes about career funnels designed to keep me competent and low profile. There were projections for what would happen to family influence graphs if I were publicly acknowledged versus if I were redirected or removed. I felt heat climb the back of my neck. I had always understood their contempt. I had not understood the architecture. This was not cruelty by impulse. This was cruelty by design. Jennifer clicked into the financial mirror and found the transfer entries. There were more than we had pulled from the core. Smaller amounts routed through different shells after the staged crash. Sums that were modest enough to hide in rounding, labeled with abbreviations that would pass as project codes. Together they formed a pattern as deliberate as a signature. She turned to Chase. "If this gets before a judge with Jane to authenticate the archive location, it survives challenge. We will fight chain of custody, but the mirror timestamps and the internal checksums are an anchor." Then she turned back to me. "There is more. Look." She opened a subfolder buried under legal archive. A draft letter sat there, never sent, unsigned, addressed to a partner at a firm in another jurisdiction. The subject line was a single phrase: adoption contingency. The word pulled the floor another inch to the side. Jennifer scrolled. The draft proposed a legal pathway to alter my origin records fully if needed, including the replacement of birth information with sealed adoption documentation routed through a private agency that had already closed. It was written as a hypothetical. It was filed next to a schedule of action items marked with checkboxes. 2 boxes were ticked, one next to the phrase evaluate feasibility, one next to the phrase identify registrar vulnerabilities. I spoke before the room could breathe. They were prepared to change everything. Not only the trust, not only the crash. The day I was born, Jennifer's eyes were steady. We do not need the adoption draft to prove conspiracy for the staged accident, but it supports motive and method. It shows a willingness to rewrite foundational records. It is a map of their appetite. Chase shifted his weight. Appetite is the right word. A soft knock at the office door cut through the air. Jennifer stiffened. She crossed the floor and peered through the side window before unlocking it. Martha stood in the hallway, wrapped in a coat held too tightly around her, cheeks reddened by the night. "I did not tell her to come," I said quickly. Jennifer nodded. "I believe you." She opened the door. Martha stepped in and closed it carefully, as if the door might shatter if touched wrong. She looked at each of us in turn and then at the glow of the screen where the word contingency was still visible. "I could not sleep," she said. "I kept hearing the engine from that night and the way the gravel sounded when you ran. I brought something I should have brought years ago." From her bag, she drew a small leather notebook and placed it on the table. The edges were worn smooth by thumb and time. "I kept schedules," she said. "Deliveries. Guests. Things Miss Claudia wanted me to remember. But I also wrote down the things she wanted me to forget. The day they told me to close the door to you. The night the car left the service bay with plates covered. The morning the laundry came back with blood I was told to throw away. I did not throw it all away." Her hands shook as she opened the book. The pages were small and crammed with neat, tight handwriting. She turned to a page dated 2 days after the crash and tapped a line with her finger. "Called to East Garage. Men in suits. Mr. Nathan present. New tarp loaded. Smell of gasoline. Instructions to burn. Miss Claudia told me to air out the hall. She said the house must never smell like that again. The room went quiet. The words were ordinary while the meaning was not. Jennifer looked up. Will you swear to this? Martha swallowed. I will. Jennifer closed the notebook gently and slid it back to Martha. Then we need to protect you. Martha straightened a fraction, as if she had been waiting for the invitation to be brave for too long. I have a cousin over the river, she said. They do not know her last name anymore. I will go there after I sign. Chase took the notebook and began photographing pages with a small camera that flashed only once. He recorded angles and distances and close shots of dates the way a field medic records a wound for later surgeons. While he worked, I sat with Martha and asked a question I had been holding since the diner. Why did you stay? She flinched as if struck and then took a breath that sounded like it had been stuck for years. Because I thought I could keep the worst parts out of the rooms where the curtains were open. Because that house fed my family. Because leaving without proof would have made me a bitter story told by people who never learned my name. I am sorry, Miss Juliana. I am sorry I did not run after you that night. I carried blankets to the door and then I stopped. I do not know why I stopped. I covered her hand with mine. You are here now. When the photographs were finished, Jennifer drafted a short affidavit for Martha to sign, limited to the facts of the notebook and the timeline around the crash. Martha signed in a slow, careful hand. Jennifer notarized it and placed it into a folder marked with the date and time. Chase saw her to the elevator while Jennifer and I assembled a new stack of exhibits. I could feel the shift as it happened. The case was no longer a lattice of suspicion supported by the courage of a few. It was hardening into evidence. The mirror logs, the purge record, the transfer labeled silence. The crash file with its missing pieces, and the officer who had retired, and the towing yard order with the crest. The DNA results that said the blood in the passenger seat was not mine. The notebook from a woman who kept doors and details and finally decided that doors were not enough. When Chase returned, he closed the office door with a precise push and turned toward us with a look I had not seen since operations that left no room for mistake. They will push back now, he said. They will frame you as ungrateful and unstable. They will claim the logs are fabricated and the notebook is sentimental. They will float rumors. They will bait you into anger so they can call you dangerous. You cannot answer any of it in public. You answer in court. I nodded. The anger had already learned how to walk quietly inside me. It could wait until a judge asked for it. Jennifer printed a revised witness list and slid it across to me. Your name anchors it. Mine builds the bridge. Jane locks the server door open. Martha lights the hallway. Chase ties the road to the room. The unknown woman in the passenger seat stands in the space our words make for her. The court will ask who she is. We will tell them what we know and demand what they have. Demanding was the right word. This was not a plea. It was a summons. We worked through the evening drafting a supplemental motion that attached the mirror records and Martha's affidavit. When we finished, my shoulders ached and my eyes burned. Jennifer printed 2 copies for filing in the morning and a third for me to study. I tucked the copy into my bag next to the hairpin. The metal touched the paper through the fabric and felt like a promise. Outside, the street had stepped into that hour when the city is most honest with itself. Lights in apartments made rectangles where people moved between cupboards and couches. Traffic thinned to a river of quiet engines. A woman walked a dog that looked like a small cloud. I had walked so many nights trying to leave the past behind me. Now I walked with it beside me. It was not a chain anymore. It was a witness. Back at the motel, I set the hairpin on the nightstand and stood at the window with the curtains pulled to the side. I pictured the vault again, the word contingency rising off the screen, the photographs in the notebook, the faint tremor in Martha's voice as she decided that fear had had enough years. I tried to imagine Claudia reading the motions, the neat lines of her mouth tightening when she reached the transfer reference label. I tried to imagine Everett realizing that the mirror he had commissioned had become the mirror in which he would be forced to look. I saw Nathan remembering the sound of branches snapping as he ran from the crash and the way headlights made the world bright enough to be believed. I lay down and closed my eyes and did not sleep. Instead, I placed everything I had learned in a row and whispered names to them. The trust, the ledger, the crash, the purge, the mirror, the notebook, the unknown woman, each one answered back with the same word. Present. Morning fractured the dark into pale gold. I sat up, tied my hair back, and said my name to the glass. Juliana Pope. The veil was not just lifting. It was tearing. And through the rip I could see the shape of the thing that had tried to swallow me. It had a schedule and a budget and an email archive. It had signatures that could be read aloud. It had a sound when it breathed. I had mistaken it for a family once. Now I knew it for what it was. I picked up my bag and the hairpin and the folder and stepped into the hall. The court waited. The truth waited. And somewhere, the woman whose blood had been written over with my name waited for someone to say she had existed. I intended to say it so clearly the stone in the courthouse walls would remember it. The courthouse steps were slick with morning rain, gray stone darkened to almost black. People moved quickly, umbrellas tilting against the wind. Reporters clustered near the entrance with cameras wrapped in plastic like precious instruments. I paused at the bottom, bag heavy on my shoulder, the flash drive and the hairpin inside pressing against one another like two small hearts beating out of rhythm. Jennifer stood beside me, calm as ever, her notes tucked neatly into a case. She held the way other people hold weapons. Chase lingered a step behind, scanning the crowd with the patient alertness of a soldier who knows danger does not always announce itself. Martha was not here. Jennifer had insisted she remain protected until the affidavit was formally introduced. Jane had slipped inside earlier under escort. I looked up at the courthouse doors. I had walked past this building as a child with Everett, who told me it was where fools argued about things that should never be questioned. Now I was walking in to ask questions that he would rather bury under marble. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and wet coats. The walls were tall, ceilings higher, every sound magnified. The clerk led us through corridors that hummed with footsteps and whispers until we reached the courtroom. The benches were already filled. Some faces I recognized from society pages, others from boardrooms where decisions were made without words. A few turned to look at me as I entered. I saw disbelief, contempt, and something else, recognition that the ghost they had written off was sitting upright in a seat she was not supposed to claim. The judge entered. The room rose. I rose with it, heart hammering. When we sat again, the sound of the gavel was sharp enough to feel in my teeth. Jennifer spoke first. Calm, measured, every word a stone placed carefully to build a path. She described the trust amendment, the lack of certification, the financial transfers. She laid out the evidence as if setting a table for a guest who would arrive hungry for the truth. Then she called Jane. Jane's hands did not tremble when she swore the oath. She described the mirror server, the checksum, the audit trails. She pointed to the logs on the screen and explained what they meant. Her voice was flat, technical, undeniable. When she finished, Everett's counsel rose, sharp suit, sharper smile. He tried to paint her as disgruntled, unqualified, biased. She did not flinch. She repeated the facts. She anchored them to timestamps no one could erase. Next came the affidavit. Jennifer read Martha's words into the record, her voice steady, almost gentle. The words hung in the room, the garage, the tarp, the gasoline, the smell Claudia wanted gone. The court reporter's keys clicked like small hammers striking nails into a coffin. I watched Everett across the room. His jaw was tight, his hands folded on the table, but his eyes gave him away. They flicked once quickly toward Claudia, and hers in turn hardened with something colder than fear, calculation. Then it was my turn. When I took the stand, the wood was smooth under my palm. I swore my name. Saying it out loud in that room felt like tearing cloth. I told the judge about the letter, the dinner, the wine, the gloves, the night I was taken to the room with the bulb. I described the voided birth certificate. I described waking to find myself erased. I described the crash and the evidence that showed it had been staged, the DNA that was not mine, the body that had stood in for me. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I spoke as if reading from a ledger that had been waiting too long to be balanced. The opposing counsel asked if I was bitter, if I was motivated by money, if perhaps my memory was colored by years of resentment. I looked him in the eye and said, if resentment could void a birth certificate, we would live in a world of orphans. What voided mine was power. I am here to put the paper back where it belongs. The courtroom did not move. The silence was heavier than sound. When the session ended for the day, reporters swarmed the steps. Microphones pressed close, questions shouted, flashes exploding in the rain. I stood for a moment, the storm around me bright and loud. Then I said a single sentence, clear enough to cut through. My name is Juliana Pope. I was erased and I am here to be recorded. The crowd rippled. The cameras drank it in. The dynasty that had erased me could no longer pretend I was gone. That night, back in the motel, I set the hairpin on the table beside the folder of exhibits. I lay down with the noise of the day still in my bones. The trial was not over. The secrets were not done unraveling, but the world now knew my name. And once the public voice is spoken, it cannot be unheard. The second day of the hearing began under a sky the color of steel. I walked up the courthouse steps with the same bag on my shoulder, but inside it the folder was thinner. Much of what mattered was already on the record, already stamped, already absorbed into the transcript that no dynasty could unwrite. Still, my heart thudded as if each step was carrying me closer to a cliff. Inside, the courtroom was fuller than yesterday. Reporters had claimed every seat they could, their pens ready, their lenses hungry. I caught sight of strangers with notebooks, faces serious, whispering as they waited. The story had traveled faster than I had imagined. The silence when the judge entered was thick enough to taste. Jennifer rose to present the new exhibits. The mirrored logs from the estate's vault, authenticated by Jane. The purge order recorded at 2:13 in the morning. The unsigned draft about adoption contingency. Each one was placed carefully, explained clearly, and then anchored to statutes that framed them not as suspicions but as violations. Then Everett's counsel stood. His words came smooth, practiced. He described me as unstable, ungrateful, estranged. He said I was a woman inventing conspiracies to fill the emptiness of her own life. He said I had hacked, stolen, trespassed. He painted me as both dangerous and pitiful, a contradiction polished into performance. I listened without looking at him. My gaze stayed on the bench where the judge's hands folded neatly together. When the counsel finished, the silence he left behind was too neat, too intentional. Jennifer rose again, not to argue but to remind. She read a single line from the financial logs aloud, transfer reference, silence. The word filled the courtroom like thunder. The judge called a recess. We stepped into the corridor where marble walls caught every whisper. Reporters surged forward again, microphones pushing toward my face. What do you say to the claim that you fabricated the evidence? What do you say about being called unstable? I stopped. The cameras stilled, waiting. I say I have documents with signatures. I say I have logs with timestamps. I say I have blood evidence that does not belong to me. That is not fabrication. That is truth. And truth does not need me to be stable. It needs me to be here. The words rippled through the crowd. Pens scratched faster, cameras clicked. Chase touched my shoulder, guiding me back inside before the wave could crush me. In the afternoon, Jennifer called the DNA expert. The testimony was clear. The blood on the passenger seat did not match mine, did not match any record attached to me. The victim in the staged crash was another woman. The fact could not be dismissed as error or confusion. It sat there, cold and undeniable. I looked across the room at Claudia. For the first time her mask cracked. Not fear, not guilt. Rage. Pure and sharp. Her eyes locked on mine, and in that silent war I saw something neither of us said aloud. She knew I would not stop. I knew she could not afford for me to continue. When court adjourned, the storm outside had broken. Rain hammered the city, washing the steps clean of chalk and ash. Reporters still waited, drenched but undeterred. I walked through them with my coat pulled tight, answering no questions this time. Not every word needed to be spoken on the steps. Some words belonged only inside, bound to oath and record. Back in the motel room, I closed the curtains and set the hairpin on the table beside the affidavit copy. The storm beat against the glass, steady and relentless. I thought of Martha's trembling signature, of Jane's calm testimony, of the way Chase had scanned the room for exits even as he stood still. I thought of the woman whose blood had been in the car, still unnamed, still waiting. The public voice had spoken. The city had heard. The dynasty had been forced to answer in a language they could not control, and yet I knew this was only the beginning. Courts were not ends, they were stages. I lay back and let the sound of the rain fill the silence. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel like erasure. It felt like space being cleared for something new. Tomorrow the fight would continue. Tomorrow the dynasty would push harder. Tomorrow the questions would be sharper. But tonight I whispered my name again into the storm, not as a plea, not as defiance, but as a record. Juliana Pope. Alive, present, heard. The morning air smelled like wet asphalt and burned leaves. I stepped out of the motel, bag slung over my shoulder, heart steady. The motions filed, the affidavits sworn, the logs mirrored and authenticated. The court had heard the voice of truth, but justice is never a single breath. It is measured in echoes and reactions, in consequences that unfold like dominoes. I called Chase. He answered immediately. His voice was low, clipped like a man who had slept little and measured every word. "They are moving," he said. "Everett and Claudia have hired a new legal team. Nathan is trying to find out what we already know. You need to be ready." I nodded though he could not see me. "I am ready." We met at the cafe across from Jennifer's office. Steam rose from the cups between us. Chase laid out the latest movements. The dynasty's lawyers were attempting to strike motions, delay hearings, discredit Jane and Martha. Their moves were calculated to pressure me, to shake my resolve. I listened quietly, absorbing the rhythm of their actions. Each one was predictable. Each one was a stone I could anticipate falling. Jennifer arrived mid-morning, carrying folders and her quiet authority. We reviewed our evidence, mapped our next steps. The mirrored logs were irrefutable. Jane's testimony was anchored in internal protocols and timestamps. Martha's affidavit held the detail of someone who had lived among the truth but had been invisible until now. The plan was clear. The evidence would hit the courtroom again. The dynasty could argue. They could threaten, but they could not erase. At noon, we returned to the courthouse. The city streets were wet, reflective, alive with people who did not know the theater about to unfold inside. Cameras clustered near the entrance, reporters whispering their questions into recording devices, unaware that the story had become larger than gossip. Inside, the courtroom pulsed with tension. Everett and Claudia were present, their faces composed, but their hands betrayed small tremors. Nathan sat to the side, eyes darting. All of them knew what we had in our hands. Jennifer began the session with precision. She summarized the mirrored logs, emphasizing the time-stamped entries and the external reads from the night of the crash. Jane was called again to verify the server source and authentication. Her testimony left no room for doubt. Next, we presented Martha's affidavit. She described every movement, every order, every covered detail. The court listened, absorbing the meticulous record of events. Her voice was steady, but her presence added a human weight to the abstract files and numbers. Everett's counsel rose, attempting to paint our witnesses as biased and unreliable. He tried to dismiss Jane as an insider with a personal agenda, Martha as sentimental and influenced. But Jennifer's cross-examination exposed contradictions and left the arguments empty. The courtroom fell silent as the weight of corroborated facts filled the space. I was called to testify. The stand was solid beneath my hands. I swallowed and spoke, recounting the events with clarity, with precision, with the confidence that comes from holding the truth. I described the erased documents, the staged crash, the unknown passenger, the transfers labeled silence. I did not raise my voice. I did not plead. I only spoke, letting the facts do their work. Questions came about my motivations, my mental state, the authenticity of the evidence. I answered honestly, calmly, each response grounded in documents and witness accounts. I spoke as someone whose existence had been denied and who was now asserting her presence not with anger but with clarity. Outside the courtroom, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Reporters clustered at the steps, pens ready, microphones poised. I made a single statement. My name is Juliana Pope. I was erased. I am here to be acknowledged. The court has heard the truth. The flash of cameras captured the moment. The voice of truth had been projected into the public, irreversible, undeniable. Back inside, the proceedings continued with arguments over motions and responses. The dynasty's counsel attempted to object to the mirrored logs and testimonies, claiming procedural errors and biases. Jennifer responded with precision, referencing statutes, precedents, and authentication procedures. Each objection was met with clear rebuttal. By late afternoon, the judge called for deliberation. We left the courtroom briefly, stepping into the quiet of the corridor. Chase looked at me with a rare softness. "You did well," he said. I nodded, feeling the fatigue in my shoulders but also a steady heat in my chest. The fight had been long, but the foundation had been laid. Outside, the city was breathing again. Streets reflected the dim light of lamps, wet from earlier showers. I felt the weight of every decision, every step I had taken since the night they tried to erase me. The evidence, the witnesses, the public voice, it was all part of a chain reaction that had begun and could not be undone. The final act had not yet come, but I could see the outlines. The dynasty would face consequences. Their attempts to erase me would crumble under the weight of documents, testimonies, and truths they had tried so desperately to hide. I whispered my name to the night once more. Juliana Pope. Alive, present, unfinished. The reckoning had begun. The judge returned with the steadiness of someone who has learned to separate noise from weight. Everyone rose. The room quieted into the kind of silence that collects at the bottom of deep water. I kept my eyes on the bench, and my hands clasped to keep them from betraying how hard my heart was working. The court finds the amendment purporting to remove Ms. Pope as a minor beneficiary void for want of certification and for fraud upon the tribunal. Distributions from the trust are stayed. The court orders the restoration of Ms. Pope's legal identity and refers matters regarding the staged collision and subsequent destruction of evidence to the district attorney. Counsel will confer on a schedule for production of the original logs and physical media identified in the Mirror archive. The gavel was not loud. It did not need to be. The words themselves were the strike. Paper had been put back where it belonged. My name had been placed on the record as something more than a rumor that would not die. Everett's jaw clenched, then unclenched. Claudia did not move at all. She sat with the poise of a statue carved to outlast weather. Only her eyes moved, cutting across the room until they found mine. They were bright and cold, a storm behind glass. Outside, the rain had thinned to a glittering mist. Reporters burst into questions. I gave one answer and stepped away before anyone could twist it into a shape I did not intend. The record stands. Back in Jennifer's office, the room felt smaller, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. She set the certified order between us and let her hand rest there for a moment. "This does not end it," she said. "It begins the part that counts." I knew what she meant. Civil orders redraw the map. Criminal referrals find out who built the wrong country on top of the map and thought no one would check the coordinates. Chase arrived with coffee and a folder. He placed it gently on the table as if it contained bone. I asked him with my eyes before I asked him with my voice. "Do we have her?" I said. "We have a name," he answered. "Not because someone gave it to us, because someone forgot to finish hiding it." The folder held a chain of small, ordinary documents that together became a door. A vendor roster from a cleaning contractor that serviced a set of safe houses. A clinic intake form filled out by hand the week before the crash. A payroll slip that was never cashed. A photograph clipped to a security badge cut from cheap plastic. Lita Morrow. She was 28. She had come from another city with a promise of steadier work than a string of shifts could ever offer. No arrests. A landlord reference that called her very punctual. A single emergency contact listed as a sister in a different state. The signature on the payroll slip had a shy curl to the L. I put my finger on the photograph and tried to will it into motion. I wanted to see her laugh. I wanted to hear the way she said her own name when she was asked to spell it. Chase's voice was careful. The badge puts her in a facility that night. The roster shows she was reassigned to a special errand by an in-house coordinator who reported up to security. The clinic log shows a visit for a cut on her palm 2 days prior. Nothing there is criminal. All of it is a path. The crash gave them the ending they needed. Jennifer leaned forward. "We will move to unseal the safe house contract and the coordinator's internal messages. The court will allow it now that chain of custody has been established. We will notify the sister before anyone else does." I nodded and realized my jaw hurt from holding still. Lita had become the answer to a question that had been asked about me. It felt wrong that I had anything of hers. It felt necessary that I carry it anyway. That night the city looked rinsed. Streetlights made coins out of puddles. I walked without destination until the courthouse steps rose in front of me again. I sat on the bottom stair where the stone kept the day's heat and let the quiet run across my nerves like clean water. Footsteps approached and stopped a polite distance away. Everett's silhouette cut a precise line against the light from the street. For a long time he did not speak. When he did, the voice was the same one that had narrated my childhood into obedience. "You could have come to me." I kept my gaze on the building. "I did," I said. "When I was a child. I came to you every day." He breathed out through his nose, and the sound carried a lifetime of training. "The dynasty requires a spine," he said. "The world does not pity families who apologize for holding firm." "The world does not remember daughters who let themselves be unmade," I answered. I became my own spine. His hand tightened on the rail. He did not deny the logs. He did not deny the transfer. He did not say Lita's name because men like him do not speak the names of people who were not invited into rooms with curtains. He only said this as if making a donation to his own defense fund. "You have brought shame." "No," I said, and finally looked at him. "I brought light." Something flickered in his eyes, too quickly for any word to catch it. He left without turning his back to me, and I watched the space he had occupied refill itself with weather. I slept for the first time that felt like sleep. The days that followed were work. Interviews, disclosures, a calendar populated with hearings and conferences instead of holidays and birthdays. Jennifer's voice, steady. Chase's footsteps, always where they needed to be before they needed to be there. Jane's messages, precise. Martha's check-ins from the cousin's apartment across the river, filled with details about tea and radiators and old quilts that smelled like sun. The district attorney's office moved faster than I had expected and slower than grief wanted. Subpoenas went out. A grand jury convened. People who had never thought they would have to say out loud what they had done began to practice how not to say it. I learned to live inside the patience of process. I learned which kind of waiting strengthens bone and which kind wastes it. On a clear afternoon in late week, we met Lita's sister in a small conference room with too much air. She had the same shy curl to her L when she signed her name in the visitor log. Her eyes found the photograph without searching, as if it had been hovering before her face for years. "She looks tired there," the sister said. "She usually looks fierce when she is tired." We told her the truth with care and without ornament. She did not cry in the loud way that draws people from the hall. She cried the old way, the way that comes from a place deep enough to have its own tide. "Thank you for saying her name," she whispered. "I thought I would be the last one to do it." When she left, she took the photograph and the promise of an inquiry that would not end with a shrug. It felt like the right exchange. I kept the copy of the roster. It felt like the right penance. The hearing on sanctions arrived with a sky so blue it felt staged. The judge read the remedies as if reading a recipe. Restoration of identity. Removal of counsel who had supervised the purge order. Referral for obstruction. Appointment of a special master to oversee data production. The numbers that had once passed as project codes became line items in a restitution schedule that would be measured in money because nothing else knows how to count that high in court. Claudia broke then, not into apology, not into tears, but into words that had been held too long in a mouth kept straight by mirrors and light. "You were never meant to be the center," she said to me, not caring that microphones were listening. "You were meant to hold the edge. That is where stability lives. You would have been safe there if you had just understood your place." I let the echo sit and fade, and then I answered the only way it could be answered. "I am not furniture, Claudia." She laughed once, sharp, and then stopped. Security moved toward her in the slow, careful way that suggests the possibility of collapse. She did not collapse. She stood perfectly straight. It would have been admirable if it had been in service of anything but herself. After court, I walked to the river with no folder, no bag, no audience. The water was quick, greedy. I held the hairpin and the roster copy and the certified order. I did not throw anything into the water. Records belong in archives, not at the bottom of a river. Instead, I stood and spoke the names that had built the bridge that carried me here. Jennifer Jane, Martha, Chase, Lita Morrow. I said my own last, not because it was least, but because it was the point on the map that the others had proven existed. Juliana Pope. A month later, in a quieter courtroom where cameras were not allowed and microphones would have sounded rude, the final order entered. The trust restored my legal standing, but redirected most distributions to a restitution fund established in Lita's name and administered by a board that did not include me and did not include anyone whose signature had ever appeared on a purge request. A scholarship line sat at the bottom of the fund charter. The first criterion read, "Present." The second read, "Unafraid." Everett did not appear that day. Claudia did. She watched the clerk stamp the papers and then stared at the seal as if she could will it to fade. Nathan arrived late and left early, his eyes never finding mine in a way that made me certain he knew exactly where I was. When it was done, I walked out into a morning that smelled like rain had considered visiting and decided against it. The city was itself again. The dynasty was learning a different language. The public voice had moved on to other stories, as it should. The record would keep this one. I did not go back to the estate. I did not visit the vault. I did not stand at the gates and count the bars. I rented a small apartment with a window that caught morning light and a table just big enough for a plant, a cup, and whatever page I was working on. I bought a second-hand radio that could not connect to anything and listened to stations I could not predict. I wrote letters to the future me and sealed them without dates. The hairpin lived in a drawer. Sometimes I put it in my pocket and carried it to the river and then carried it home again. It had stopped being bait. It had become proof that objects can survive design. One evening, months later, the sun lowered itself gently into the river and made the surface look like a sheet of hammered copper. I stood on the same railing where I had once promised myself that I would tear the story open. I thought about the gash in the guardrail at the crash site and the way metal holds memory. I thought about the way a courtroom can feel like a mouth and a record can feel like a spine. A woman stopped beside me, watching the water. She did not know me. I did not know her. We shared the view in perfect silence, and then she left, her footsteps soft, her presence recorded by nothing but the air. I said the names again, all of them quietly. When I reached Lita's, I lifted my hand as if she could see the gesture and then let it fall back to the railing. Present, I said, to the river and to the city and to the version of myself that had waited this long to be fully here. Then I went home.